make me laugh. That'd be great. But we could work through it. And so that's what would be fun. If you guys have something out there that you think is a tick-borne illness, even if you're not sure, present it. And I would love us to follow this pattern of presenting the case first and then talking about whatever it could be. And then, because that's what you have to do when you're actually doing this, right? You got to look at the stuff and try to figure out what it is.
And just a note that we don't take ourselves too seriously, as
right.
you can see from the pun at the bottom of the slide and the fact that Dr. Collins has worn his
I've got green.
Lime green shirt. All right, so we are recording. You're good to go.
Hey, Dr. Collins?
Yes.
Is that Justin?
That's Justin.
I guess.
Oh, he's breaking up. I think you're breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry. We can hear you, but it's not clear.
Okay, how's that?
Oh, that's much better.
Oh, okay, great. Quick question about Babesia. My phone broke off a little bit, so I just got back on. Is we get a lot of labs here at the health department, which I'm sure Clinton gets plenty of too, and they're usually at the level in the ratio is usually like 1 to 64. They're really low for Babesia. Is that something that providers still would want to follow up with even at that low of a titer or level?
Yes, because you can get you want to repeat it, and like even if it comes back the titer negative, it doesn't prevent me from wanting to treat because early on the infection, the titers may not be positive. Although for Babesia they're pretty good, and usually, if I remember right, an IgM of 1 to 64 is considered significant for Babesia. If the IgG could mean past infection. So if you're going to look for Babesia with a serology, you want to, and I'm pretty sure we did that too. We sent out serology. But it's the IgM, and I think it's supposed to be greater than or equal to 1 to 64. And again, IgG could mean past infection because this can be subclinical. You may not even know you had it. In fact, it's more common to get sick with it over the age of 40. And if you're under the age of 40, you can walk around with this and not even feel sick. And that's well, that too. Yeah.
Wow, excellent. Thank you. It makes sense. Yeah, for surveillance at the health departments, our minimum level is 1 to 256. Because we have to go off of the case definition. So even for surveillance, we can say things to providers like, hey, you need to consider treating this, but we can't make it a case, quote, unless they're technically, I think 164 would be the level for epi-linked blood donors. That's kind of surveillance-wise how it works at I'm sure, I don't know if Clinton's on the line, but that's kind of how that works at health departments for surveillance. And so, for cases, it's kind of unfortunate with Babesia, they have to have quite a high level, 256 or more, if they haven't, had that, except for those exceptions.
No, that makes sense, I think. For surveillance, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
You're right about something else. I don't know if it's going to be covered in this thing. I think I put it in. I'll see. If you brought up a blood transfusion thing, and I want to talk about that a little bit. Remind me if I didn't put it in there, I want to say something about that.
Okay.
All right.
All right, thanks, Justin. Awesome questions.
Yes.
So we will transfer over to our didactic. Everybody can see that slide. Thumbs up.
So
yeah, beautiful. Thanks.
We've already talked about a lot of this now already, but unlike malaria, which is mosquito-borne, this is not. It's tick-borne. And it's the same tick that carries Lyme, Ixodes scapularis. And it's the same one that carries anaplasma, Ixodes scapularis. And Babesia microti is the one we see in the United States. There are other species in other areas. They say along coastal regions from eastern U.S. to New Jersey and Massachusetts. I think Leanne may give us some information that maybe it's not just on coastal areas anymore.
Right.
Yes, I do have it here. It can be transmitted. This is the most common cause of transfusions-associated infections in the United States. Is Babesia, because it's not routinely screened for in the health department, in the blood banks. And so there are plenty of cases out there where someone remember, if you're young, you can walk around with this and not even know you have it. And if you donate blood and you give it to somebody that happens to be susceptible, they can get Babesia. It's happened. It's, I think over the last 10 years, there's something like 200 cases, not quite that many, about 160 cases over the past 10 years that have been documented from blood transfusion. So it's one of those things that you can get from a blood transfusion. And you can also get it, fetal maternal transmission can also occur. Okay. The people that are really at risk are the ones that have no spleen. They can get life-threateningly sick from this. And people have died from this. It's, you know, it's about I think it's about a 5% mortality, but it's almost always in someone like this who has no spleen. So it's, again, what we were just talking about, this is not unique. The clue here that it might be Babesia was his travel history to an area where at that time in 2014, Babesia is known to be. He's off the coast of Maryland. And so he has an anemia. He would travel to a place where Babesia is known to exist. And he has other labs to suggest a tick-borne illness and a compatible clinical syndrome. So we didn't just treat him for Babesia. We kept him on doxycycline too, because co-infections do happen. Okay. And the opposite sometimes comes up, by the way. If you diagnosed anaplasma or Lyme, do you need to treat for Babesia? I think there's a little bit of difference in opinion about what to do in that situation. I personally do not routinely treat for Babesia unless they've got anemia or high LDH myself, because it's, again, you're having to throw 2 more drugs at people when they're already taking doxycycline. And so also, unless they're life-threateningly ill, you have time to diagnose this. This is not going to kill them unless they're, again, no spleen or something. Okay. There's your Maltese cross that you never see. Now you've seen it. But if you also look, there's rings that are really show up nicely there, and that's what our man had. He had rings. And that's what you see. Okay. And then here again, there's the ticks that they're carrying this illness. It's really kind of unusual. It's like it's, at least at this point in time when I remember, it's not very common on the West Coast at all, but it does occur. And it's much more common on the East Coast, by our tick. Okay. Yeah, so that's an area too where they were showing. And if you see, I think there's a tiny little bit over there on the West Coast, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of dots.
Just a little tiny bit over
Yeah.
here, which might be hard to see on some
Yeah.
people's screens.
So,
but I think we
but
have
if you notice,
more
they're
info.
not showing much up our way from this map. Okay. That may, again, these, I think Leanne can speak to that more in a minute.
Mhm.
So we can, let's see. Oh, 159 cases in blood products. I have it in here. Okay, there it is. And they don't screen for it. So I think we can move, it's 15 to 1,700 cases a year, at least when I was putting this together. Okay. And again, just to remind you, it's a non-specific illness. I still think of these things as malaria-like illnesses, because this is what malaria looks like too. Headache, fever, malaise, myalgias, I don't feel good. And so you can get exactly the same kind of thing. So again, it causes lysis of red cells. You get the a high LDH, a low haptoglobin. That was a real clue to me when I got his LDH back and it was high. I didn't put it in the slides, but I remember it to this day. I'm like, bingo, he's got Babesia. He may have something else, but he's got Babesia. And he did. And then all these other things are what you see with any tick, can see, don't necessarily have to see, with a lot of different tick-borne illnesses, including Rocky Mountain spotted fever. One thing about Babesia that I think is a little more common than some of the other ones is you can get a cough with it. You can even get pulmonary infiltrates with it. And so it can be confusing sometimes. Okay. So you can get a thick or thin blood smear, you can get a PCR test, or you can get antibody testing, which is all listed right there too. The most sensitive test is PCR, so it's over 90% accurate, and his was positive. So it's nice because in this particular case, you get a test that actually, has good sensitivity. And I can't remember what the turnaround time was, but it's about a week. So you got to kind of treat again if you really think they've got it. Okay. And this is the treatment for Babesia, which is the only one that's not doxycycline. You do a atovaquone, which I'm familiar with because we use it for we used to use it for PCP prophylaxis for people that couldn't take Bactrim. It tastes terrible, by the way. I have patients that said it's the devil's excrement.
Colorful.
Yeah, I had one that brought me in a bottle of it, a yellow bottle that was labeled devil's excrement from the internet.
Oh my God.
Right. And then the azithromycin is kind of, I know it's odd, but you put those two together and that's what you treat with. And if you notice, that's a lot of azithromycin. It's not your standard dosing. Okay. And if you're really sick, you treat it a lot like malaria. You use clonidine, quinine, IV, and that's what a lot of times you'll do with malaria when they're really sick. There is also some papers out that use a drug called Malarone, which is used for malaria, and it's actually a really good drug against Babesia as well, but this is what they're recommending standard. And this is where he was. I just thought it was worth looking at. I want to go.
Lovely.
For nice horses.
Right. Okay.
So if there's any questions or comments, looks like we had something come in on the chat. Am I crazy? Did someone
Scroll down a little bit on your chat.
Oh, here we go. Nope. All right. So good job. You've got applause.
Yeah.
Anybody else with a question? You can unmute, raise your hand, throw something in the chat box. All right. Looks like all's quiet. So now I am going to once again do a little tech transfer here, and I'm going to bring up Leanne's slides for you, and she'll give you a little more information on our topic. Did we introduce her? I think we did.
We can do it.
Yeah. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you. Give me just one moment, and I'm going to resize everything here because I lost some.
And just remind them Leanne's credentials.
Some volume. I do need to remind everyone of Leanne's credentials, and I know we've got a PhD, and I'm so sorry, Leanne. I'm gonna butcher your credentials.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I can.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'll introduce myself.
Thank you. All right, so hopefully everyone can see that slide deck, and this is Leanne, and you give that beautiful intro of yourself if you don't mind.
Oh yeah. So I'm the sucker who goes out into the swamps and collects ticks. That's what I do. No, so I am currently a professor of biology at Paul Smith's, and I've been working for 6 years to do monitoring and surveillance for tick-borne diseases in the North Country. My background is in medical science. I was a professor of medicine actually at the University of Rochester Medical School, but I've been up here for 20 years, and now I'm doing field work basically because I feel it's the most important piece of information that's necessary for you folks to do your job properly. So with very little funding for this, oddly, this is how I think it's best that I spend my time, and it's really intriguing to me, and I'm really pleased that you asked me to join you. So, and Keith and I have been doing the lecture circuit a little bit together, and that's been really great. So it's really interesting to hear you all and the difficulties you have diagnosing these tick-borne diseases. That I'm not a healthcare provider, never have been, so this is really interesting to me. So what I want to talk to you about is a little bit of detailed information, what I've found, my staff and I have found over the last 6 years here in the North Country. And so every year we attempt to visit about 40 sites throughout, and the map shows that. We work with the New York State Department of Health in Albany, the Vector Ecology Laboratory there, the Bureau of Communicable Disease Control. They do all our testing, and they maintain the database of all our results. So this just shows where we're finding Ixodes scapularis ticks, which are deer ticks, black-legged ticks. As you can see, the sites that we found, this is our most recent, the highest densities are at the lowest elevations, but we're starting to see some interesting things happen with high densities appearing in the higher elevations. Like, I don't have a pointer, but right there at the Clinton-Essex border, that red dot, that's the base of Whiteface Mountain. So it's starting to climb, and we're now seeing these ticks up 1,800 feet of elevation and even up maybe well beyond 2,000 feet. So climate change is driving them up. So there you go. So during our surveillance, we test for 5 pathogens: Lyme, Anaplasma, Babesia, Powassan, and oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. It's the cousin of Lyme, but it doesn't matter. We don't find that too often. So we're testing for.
Borrelia miyamotoi.
It's what's that?
Borrelia miyamotoi.
Yeah. Yes, miyamotoi. There we go.
Yeah.
But we're talking about Babesia today, and it was really quite surprising that in 2016, right at the Clinton-Essex County border, it was actually the Wickham Marsh area, Osable Point. It was surprising to the folks in Albany and to me that we found Babesia at 2 sites there. And I'll show you a map of the spread. That surprised us because prior it hadn't been found except much farther south in the lower Hudson Valley of New York, or just above New York City. So it was a big geographic range spread that happened quickly. So go ahead to the next slide. So that was an interesting finding. 2016, we did find it here.
Leanne, I'm going to interrupt just for a moment. Can I get a thumbs up from everyone if you can see Leanne's slides? It looks like someone might be having an issue. Are you not seeing Leanne's slide, green slide, Babesia? Vanessa's got it. Justin, are you able to see that slide? It's a green slide with the map of the Adirondack counties. Just want to make sure everyone can see what we're looking at. Brandy, are you able to see it? Yep, okay. Okay, so yes, Leanne, thank you. Just whenever you're ready to move to the next.
Yeah, so we can move on to the next slide. So what we do is we go out to the sites and actually collect 50 ticks of each life stage from sites twice a year, and that's how we do our surveillance. So this slide just points to the spot, Sable Marsh, Wickham Marsh area, Clinton-Essex County border, where we found Babesia in these host-seeking ticks in 2016. But it was isolated to that one spot. So go ahead. This shows a history. So we were talking about kind of historic, and you all were mentioning that, well, Powassan wasn't here in 2014, but we don't know that it wasn't here because no one was looking. So
You're right.
Surveillance, and it probably in fact was. So surveillance began with our efforts in 2014. But prior to that, in between 2002 and 2007, over on the left-hand part of that partial map, all it shows is that Babesia was found in host-seeking ticks only in the area just north of New York City, so way low Hudson Valley. But if you go to 2008 to 2016, which is the larger map with all the stars on it, that's the most current, well, actually that's up to 2016. You can see all the stars are positive host-seeking ticks, but look how it jumped up to our region in 2016. So if we weren't looking, we wouldn't know that. We were also, and I know Keith is very interested, what we see in the field, does it correlate with what you all see in the clinic? And we feel that it does, because in 2016, there was at least one case diagnosed in either Clinton, Essex County, or both. So it does seem to correlate with what you all are seeing in the clinic. So whereas Keith wasn't privy to this information, there's no one here to distribute this except for me. He, of course, wasn't even aware that there was a risk of acquiring Babesia locally since 2016. But in fact, there was. And I would, since we've been doing this since 2014, I think the risk just began in 2016 locally. Go ahead to the next slide. And in 2017, where I had a group of students really studying this because we thought it would sort of spread radially from that site, but it was amazing. In 2017, we found Babesia in ticks throughout the North Country. We found it at 5 sites in all the counties, Clinton, Essex, Franklin, and St. Lawrence. So how is this infectious agent spreading between ticks so distant geographically? We don't know. My feeling is nymphal ticks are being carried on birds, migratory birds, as they fly from place to place. That's probably how it originated in the Wickham Marsh, because that's a migratory bird landing site. And it just seems to have spread very rapidly. So now there is a risk of Babesia exposure in these ticks throughout the North Country in a single year. 2018, it seemed to kind of disappear a bit from a few of the sites, and we don't have a result yet from 2019. We weren't able to do as extensive a survey this year because I lost all my funding, and it's only me out there in the field. So we've only been able to do 1 site in each county, whereas prior we could do 40.
Leanne, we're going to have to hold a bake sale for you.
Hold a bake sale. I feel like such a beggar, but it's just, it feels absurd that I can't get even the small amount of money to do this work. So anyway, but we are doing at least 1 site, and I work closely with the Department of Health, and we've chosen the sites carefully. And so we have covered Essex County, right near Elizabethtown, the center. We've covered Clinton, we've covered them all, at least 1 site. Okay, so next slide. So in 2019, actually that should have said 2018. This was results from last fall. So in the fall, we collect adult ticks, and we collected 407 from 8 sites. We did find Babesia in 2 sites, again, Clinton and Essex counties. infection rate was pretty high, 22% of ticks that we collected were positive for Babesia. So it's not rare, it's almost a quarter of the ticks have Babesia in them at those 2 sites. And overall, the infection rate was 10%. So, well, we don't recommend that you all as providers test the ticks or have the patients test them for these pathogens, because there really aren't good labs to do that. And really probably shouldn't be part of your diagnostic criteria. If they do have a lab test the tick, just know that about 10% are infected with Babesia in the North Country. So there is a substantial risk. And this is pretty much consistent with what they're seeing in other parts of the state. So whereas it's kind of the lore that we don't have a risk of Babesia here, and I know Keith wasn't aware of it, we in fact really do. And it's steadily increasing. So that just shows the percent positive from 2016, 17, 18, and we don't know yet about 2019. And number of cases in humans in the state. So back in 1994, very, very few. And you all probably know that it's reported in the county of residence, not the county in which it was diagnosed. And so we have so many visitors that you know, this has to be taken with a grain of salt. But if you look then at the map on the right at 2016, you see that there are cases being reported here in the North Country. Those could be traveling, but because now we know there is a local risk, it can be locally acquired. And I think that's all I have.
Yeah, it looks like it was the end.
Yep.
All right, so back to everybody here. Any questions?
I have a couple questions. Sorry.
Sure.
All right. So my first question is for the Babesia, for the titer, when I order my tick panel that goes to CVPH, it just gives me an IgG titer.
This is a question for Keith, not for me.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine.
Yeah, so what I would suggest that you do if you're looking for Babesia is get the PCR. It's better anyway.
Okay.
And not even worry about the titer if you can't get it. But the IgG, it doesn't mean much to me because it could be, again, past infection. So
Okay.
you would have to probably specify IgM, which is, and then they'd probably get it wrong and still give you IgG anyway.
Yeah, because that's like the tick panel that was set up for us, and that's part of it.
Has IgG, I got you.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would
And then,
I would go straight to the PCR. Have them do a thick.
okay.
Do a PCR.
Okay. And then my other question is, I just got an email about new draft guidelines for Lyme disease. You know, it was just, and I know this is not about Lyme, but it had one thing about it that may be applicable to if you do get, you know, the titers is, how do you differentiate between reinfection and treatment failure? Especially in a place that we get people that get tick bites every day.
So that's a hard question to answer, other than the fact that if someone has a compatible clinical syndrome, once they're positive, they usually stay positive by ELISA and Western blot. So you can't use that anymore for diagnosis. That's true. So you have to basically, you have to do rely on their exposure history and their compatible clinical syndrome, and then you have to treat. I can tell you that if you treat Lyme appropriately, then clinical failure rate should be very low. But the clinical reinfection rate can be whatever the clinical infection rate is. And before I leave the other question, I would say up here, when I think about it, even if you just get IgG, since there aren't a lot of people up here that have had Babesia, it may be of some utility up here, even if you just get an IgG. So it's probably still worth sending the serology, but I would definitely get the PCR.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Vanessa. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Gabrielle, will you pipe in just for a second? I just want to make sure that you were able to hear everything okay, and that you had the slides. And if you need to unmute, you should have an icon in your, oh, yep, here we go. But okay, just wanted to make sure that you were able to hear, and it was a valuable session for you. So terrific. Thank you so much. And Justin, were you raising your hand? You're on mute right now. So you can do *6 on your phone and that will unmute you.
Okay, great. This works?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that's interesting. I don't know if you guys have seen this. Dr. Damaro was talking about different labs to try and diagnose Babesia. Some of the different labs, usually downstate, a few places in Albany do this. Use Babesia fish. It's through IGenX, who definitely is a company. They've got some alternative labs. And so we called them last year asking, hey, listen, would this be something that is approvable? Is this something that we can make a case definition on? And actually the state said that in New York we can. And so they did reach CLEP approval for some of those alternative labs, which there's other ones for like Lyme that have come up that don't meet anything, but the one for Babesia from IGenX, the state will take as being basically usable in a case, which is interesting. I don't know if people have ever seen that, or Dr. Collins, have you ever seen that lab ever? It's pretty rare.
I have not, and I've not seen it recommended in any of the papers that I've read about how to diagnose it. Doesn't mean it's a bad test, though, because I'm just not familiar with it or how it's done. And what I ought to probably do is have maybe someone from our lab come to our next session as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's very, very rare. Usually we see a PCR or something like that, or the IFA. The IFA, the IgG is the one that we see from anybody reporting to us.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it may be a fine test. I just don't know enough about it to say yes or no. But I'm assuming if New York State says it's okay, it's okay. You know. But I think we ought to have we have a microbiology supervisor we'll ask to join us next time. Her name is Diane Farnsworth, and we'll try to get her on the panel too, because she would be very helpful to answer these kind of questions, I think.
Excellent, absolutely. I mean, we've had over the last few years, like maybe one a year. We had in 2016, I know we had one. 2019, we have one already, and then 2018, we had one actual confirmed case. Those are our levels.
Wow.
Okay, so that's a solid lead-in. Can I just put a plug in? What we really, really love is to have case presentations from you all rather than us presenting a case to you. So if anyone has either a present case or a past case that, like Dr. Collins said, it doesn't even need to necessarily be a tick-borne infection, but something that presented similarly, regardless of you know, whether you think it's exciting or not, the cases that our spokes present tend to be the best and the most talked about and generate the most questions. So if you have anything at all that you'd like to present, please shoot me an email and we'll get you set up for the next session. And Dr. Damaris, I believe Dr. Collins wanted to just circle back with you really quickly.
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Vanessa, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want you to ask, the next session we have, I'm going to have Diane Farnsworth here, and I want you to ask her that same question you asked me. Okay, because she's more qualified to answer it than I am.
Okay, I will.
Good, because just remember that I'm going to get her back here next time. We should have had her here today, but we're learning how to do this ourselves.
Okay.
Good.
All right, terrific. Brenda, anything that you'd like to add? Any questions? Was all the audio good for you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it.
And Justin, it sounds like you had maybe something on the docket that we could get you to present next time. Do you have any interest? Okay. I like to put people right on the spot.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. I mean, we could find a case from any year. We don't have that many to choose from. 2017 we had I think 4, but then 3 were revoked by the state. So any confirmed case I want to hone in on because it met definition.
Okay, great. So I'll be in touch with you. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we are right on time. Just as a reminder, we'll have this recording up on our website. I'll send a link to the website along with an evaluation form so that you can get CME credit for this session. And We'll look forward to seeing you next time. And one more plug, really, if you have any colleagues at all that you think might be interested in joining you, even if they're just sitting next to you on the same screen, that's fine. Or if you think that they may want to Zoom in as well, send me contact information. I'm happy to reach out to them, or you can reach out in advance and then send them my way. Justin, do you have something? Are you saying goodbye? I see a hand and I jump all over it. All right. Looks like it was a goodbye. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Great rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.